Hello. I really don't think I'm gonna be able to stick to a regular time. I don't think I have it in me. Um, I think I said 2 p.m. earlier is 1:30, but I just had to really get a move on because I just kept thinking about this, and then I was like, I don't want to be stressed about this. I'm just reading a book. Um, yeah. Happy April 11th. I really don't have anything to say. Yeah. Okay. I'm on page. Wow, I kind of look not great right now. Oh well. We're starting a new chapter 19, To Power in the City, and I'm so excited, and I hope you are too. Let me get a little sip of. I also got some sparkling water as well. It's gonna be a good day. In New York City, 1933 was the year of the Goo Goo. Dormant since debonair John Perroy Mitchell, he was the former mayor, had once stepped it into the ground nearly 2 decades before, the city's good government movement, Goo Goos was the politician's epithet for the men and women in it, had been hauled back on its feet by stern-visaged, cane-carrying Samuel Seabury. In the early stages of the Seabury investigation, the city had only snickered at the fantastic alibis offered by the participants in the Tin Box Parade. Tin Box Parade is something that he's not gonna explain, but I feel like I need to know what that is. The Tin Box Parade. What is the Tin Box? There's no Wikipedia article about it. Are you kidding me? What's a girl to do? Tin Box Parade. All right, I'm on a New York Times article from 1934 about the Tin Box Parade. Also, I'm sorry, I'm being really. It got really hot, and so I'm gonna open the window. The Tin Box Parade is a book, apparently. That should probably have an article. Also, hello if you're just coming in. Ah! I'm overheating a lot. I need to open the window. Whenever David's here, he turns on the hello. Okay, the Tin Box Parade is when they found bribe money in tin boxes. Mateo, this is so helpful. Thank you so much. Whenever David's here, he makes the heat so hot, and I go crazy. Okay, anyway, back to the book. We're on chapter 19, To Power in the City. 1933 is the year of the Goo Goos, which is the good government organization people. All right. Pretty young women had thrown roses at Jimmy Walker's feet as he left the hearing room after testifying. But as Seabury's also the Seabury investigation feels like something it was discussed, but it feels like something I should refresh myself on. Okay, it's the Seabury investigation, aka the Hofstadter Committee, was a joint legislative committee formed by the New York State legislature on behalf of Governor FDR to probe into corruption in New York City, especially the police department and magistrates courts in 1931. It led to major changes in the method of arrest, bail, and litigation of suspects in New York City. It coincided with the decline in Tammany Hall's political influence in New York State politics. And it's kind of this Wikipedia article gets 500 page views a month, which is I don't know, it's not that many, but it's more than a lot of sometimes when I look up the random minor characters in this book, they get 100 page views a month. So I feel like 500, it's all right, that's got some historical significance. Anyway, okay, so there's no more corruption anymore. But as Seabury's quiet, courteous, but relentless prodding reached higher and higher, and the revelations it uncovered became more and more sordid, not even a $10 million welfare fund for the unemployed went unlooted. And as the deepening depression made the public less tolerant of the making of illegal fortunes with its money, the laughter faded. In the last weeks of the hearing, when Seabury left the courthouse in Foley Square for lunch, thousands of men and women hung out the windows of surrounding office buildings to cheer him. The judge courteously raised his hat, but did not smile. Mayor John Patrick O'Brien was proving that his gaffe about the police commissioner was in character. A master of the malapropism, he told a Harlem audience, "My heart is as black as yours." And didn't, that's not great. Uh-oh. That reminds me of when, do you guys remember when Joe Biden said something about, what was his gaffe? I might be saying it wrong, but basically he said something about like, we need to help the white kids and the poor kids. It's kind of a gaffe on that level. Okay, anyway. Mayor O'Brien didn't do much to win the Jewish vote when he told a synagogue audience that he had always admired that scientist of scientists, Albert Weinstein. O'Brien would be the Democratic nominee in the regular election to be held in November 1933, and obviously he would not be the most formidable of candidates. With Roosevelt spurned by Tammany at the 1932 DNC, moving as president to take control of the city away from the wigwam. I don't know what the wigwam is, probably some like political slang. The wigwam meaning politics. The wigwam was the convention center that was the site of the 1860 Republican National Convention. Okay, so when he says the wigwam, he just must be talking about Republicans. Okay. Okay, so Roosevelt is taking control of the city away from the wigwam, the stars that made fusion feasible, incontrovertible scandal, and democratic disunity had never been more favorably in conjunction. All the reformers needed was a candidate with charisma. Founding a city fusion party, they united with the city's Republican Party in a fusion conference committee whose purpose was to select a candidate. And when Seabury, their first choice, refused to run, and they began considering other names, Robert Moses's was prominent among them. Exciting. New York's reformers considered Moses to be one of them. The old guard of reform viewed him almost paternally. Darwin James and Henry Moskowitz liked to tell anecdotes about his work for them on the Municipal Civil Service Commission. It's funny because when he was working there, his bosses didn't actually like him that much because he was so full of himself, right? Henry H. Curran, fusion candidate against Hylan in 1921, remembered Moses as secretary of his campaign committee. Joseph M. Price, a wealthy dress manufacturer and chairman of the City Club's Board of Trustees, remembered Moses pleading earnestly in the City Club lounge for the club's support for the executive budget proposal. And Richard Spencer Childs, good thing he has a last name, who had made Moses secretary of his New York State Association, delighted in telling friends inaccurately, "I am the man who gave Bob Moses his first job." Other slightly younger reformers, men in their 50s, like Stanley Isaacs and Raymond Ingersoll, considered Moses a comrade in arms. And he was nothing less than an idol to many of a new generation of reformers, including, get ready for this intro, 6'5" blonde and blue-eyed. Okay, so it's a great description, but then listen to this name. Not really a very attractive name, in my opinion. Newbold Morris, a Yale graduate who at 30 was president of the Silk Stocking 15th Assembly District Republican Club. Okay, so he was an idol. So, okay, Robert Moses is an idol to the really hot guy named Newbold. He's also an idol to college professors like Wallace S. Sayre, 28, of New York University, and Adolph A. Burrell Jr., 38, and Joseph D. McGoldrick, 32, of Columbia. and young experts in public administration like Rufus E. McGahan, 39, Secretary of the Citizens Union, and Paul Blanchard, 41, Director of the City Affairs Committee of New York, who were spending enough evenings studying legislative bills and debating municipal policy in the lounges of the City Club and Citizens Union to prove that the Tammany view of man was still, as one historian puts it, only partially valid. Men are moved by things other than just narrow self-interest. The attitude of the reformers toward Moses was understandable. Not only had he fought in so many causes in which they believed, he had triumphed. Reformers who had learned through bitter, repeated experience the difficulty of translating ideas into realities were almost in awe of his success in doing so. Lillian Wald of the Henry Street Settlement wrote him, "May I tell you how profoundly I admire your genius in designing the parks and procuring them for the community." And then another quote, "His administrative accomplishment in Albany," Rufus McGahan said, "was amazing." The reformers didn't know the details of those triumphs. They were not, after all, on the inside of state government, where Moses's power plays had been executed, and they knew nothing of his methods. If there had been a change in Robert Moses, none but a handful of them had even an inkling of it, and those who had seen glimpses of the change had, like Childs, been charmed into forgetting them by a Moses who needed their continuing support. They attributed Moses's arrogance to brilliance, his impatience to zeal. If you just joined, we're on chapter 19, and he might become the mayor. They need a new mayor. They need somebody who's like kind of a moderate, I guess, like in between. They're making a new thing called the Fusion Party, where they're fusing the parties. And Tammany Hall, the people that had all the power, they're kind of like, they were so corrupt that there was the Seabury investigation, and so they're kind of like losing all their power. Okay, anyway, and all the reformers love Robert Moses, and that's why they want him to be the mayor. Moreover, reformers, more than slightly addicted to a black and white view of morality and life, tended to classify all government officials as either politicians who were in public service for power and money, who put those considerations ahead of the common good, and who had debased politics into a somewhat questionable way of making a living, or as public servants who were non-political and therefore good. And they had no doubts about which class Moses belonged to. As a bureau staffer, no reformer had been more scornful of practical politicians than he, Robert Moses, had. His well-publicized refusal to accept a salary for his services, coupled with his frequent denunciations of patronage and of favoritism in contracts and condemnation awards, convinced reformers, since they had no reason to question his sincerity, that his views had not been changed just because he had obtained power. "The principle is the important thing," he had written. They thought he still believed that. And, wait, hold on. High purpose, Richard Childs was to tell the author, and ability, and not interested in getting something for either the boys or for himself, utter selfless in all of it. That was how I thought of Moses. His brilliance was legendary among them. In the field of public administration, they agreed his mind was unequaled in suppleness and inventiveness. Imagine if I walked over to someone and was like, "Your mind is so supple." Lillian Wald was not the only reform leader who used the word genius in describing Moses. One reformer who maintained a certain detachment about reformers because he was at home not only in the paneled boardroom of the City Club, but also in the bare-walled clubhouses of Brooklyn's 4th Assembly District, where he had proved himself a canny practical politician by ousting the old-line Republican boss and installing himself in his place, was Paul Windells. Says Windells, "Those people, those reformers, could get a little starry-eyed sometimes, and at the time they were very starry-eyed indeed about Bob Moses. They saw in him a man whose ideals were just as high as theirs, and who had, in addition, qualities which enabled him to accomplish things of revolutionary magnitude in the public sphere. The younger men there, and some of the older ones too, To tell you the truth, they idolized that man. They seemed to consider him the beau ideal of what the reformer should be. And to tell you the truth, I thought I was a pretty shrewd cookie, and sometimes I felt the same way. Water break. More practical considerations also recommended Moses to them as a candidate. First, there was the immense favorable publicity he had received. This was no candidate respected in the Council of Reforms, but unknown to the public. This was a candidate about whose virtues the public had been educated for years. More important, there was Moses's relationship with Al Smith. The Brown Derby was still the most popular figure in the city. When, early in 1933, a downtown Tammany club had begun circulating petitions urging him to run for mayor, it collected more than 200,000 signatures in 1 week before Smith issued a statement categorically refusing to make the race. The Fusion leaders knew how Smith felt about Moses. If Moses ran, they believed, Smith would either break with Tammany and support him, or at the very least, remain neutral. And either of those stands, they believed, would result in a mass Democratic defection to Moses, a defection essential to victory in a city in which the party registration of enrolled voters was almost 4-1 Democratic. Before the Fusion Conference Committee began meeting in March 1933, Moses was contacted by a city club board chairman, Price, who had, as chairman of the legendary Committee of 107, do you know what the Committee of 107 is? I don't, but it's probably going to tell us. As the chairman of the legendary Committee of 107, he had been the prime mover behind John Perroy Mitchell's nomination in 1913, former mayor of New York, and who wanted now to play the same role for Moses. Moses assured Price that he would accept the Fusion nomination if it was offered to him. As soon as Seabury turned down a renewed offer of the nomination, Price brought Moses's name before the Fusion Committee and received an almost unanimously favorable response. Oh, we have a guest. Let's see. But Seabury had not been present at the meeting, and Seabury's opinion of Moses was markedly different from the other reformers. Yeah, Pearl's here. Pearl, you have fans. Pearl, what do you think about corruption in 20th century city government? Do you think it's a problem? Now I'm trying to just make her look at the camera. He didn't like him. Opinionated as well as dedicated, Seabury was accustomed to deference when he presented his views. Reformers fondly called him the bishop because of his pontifical air, although they were careful to do so behind his back. And deference was not Moses's strong suit. In 1932, the two men had a bitter confrontation in Al Smith's Fifth Avenue apartment when Seabury attempted to win the ex-governor's support for a city charter revision that would determine membership on the city council on the basis of proportional representation and would therefore encourage minority parties and help end Tammany's domination of the council. Seabury and Moses, a foe of proportional representation, had argued for hours before Smith, who, ill with a severe cold, was propped up in the bed, too hoarse to speak. Exactly what happened at the confrontation is unrecorded, but Moses says, Seabury didn't stand up very well. He didn't seem to have his facts at all. It was a very, very painful session. More than personality differences lay behind Seabury's hostility to Moses, however. Its roots lay in the judge's hostility to Tammany Hall and in his conviction that Moses' election would allow Tammany to retain control of the city. A direct descendant of, quote, "Speak for yourself, John," and Priscilla Alden of the Mayflower, whose ancestors included Samuel Jones, the father of the New York Bar, and a long line of distinguished Episcopalian clergymen. I don't know what Speak for Yourself, John, is and how you can be a descendant of it. Maybe I'll look it up. I'm just kind of in a look things up sort of mood today. Okay, Speak for Yourself, John. All right, this is like not this isn't like that famous of a thing. Like when you Google it, I had to kind of scroll to the bottom, not just to get past ads. It looks like Priscilla Mullins, who is this guy's, or wait. Well, okay, so this Judge Seabury's ancestor is a guy who had a apparently famous retort, or it's a woman who had a famous retort, "Why don't you speak for yourself, John?" And it was just during a Pilgrim battle situation. So the lady said, "Why don't you speak for yourself, John?" to two Pilgrim dudes that were fighting over her, apparently. That feels like such a niche reference. I wonder how many people reading this book like were like, "Oh yeah, of course, speak for yourself, John," without having to look it up. Maybe it's everyone, maybe it's just me. Okay, anyway, so Seabury comes from a long line of WASPs, I guess. He was an idealist. Okay. There was a long line of distinguished Episcopalian clergymen. Samuel Seabury had, even as a boy studying in his father's library with the portraits of a dozen famous ancestors peering down, stern and patrician, on his work, been markedly aware and proud of this lineage of law and righteousness, and he was determined to live up to it. He was an idealist. In his youth, an adoring disciple of single tax philosopher Henry George, he was elected at the age of 21 president of the Manhattan Single Tax Club, resisting the urge to look up what the Single Tax Club does. At 24, he gave up his nomination as Citizens Union Party candidate for the state assembly to play Sancho Panza in that most gallant of all the Don Quixote rides of New York politics, George's mayoralty campaign of 1897. Okay, well now I really want to know what Henry George's mayoralty campaign was like. That sounds like a really great story. I hope it's coming up. If not, I'm just going to start it and maybe look it up if I get bored later today. Parentheses. When that impossible dream was ended by George's death less than a week before Election Day, Seabury followed on horseback behind the casket, adorned with white roses and the inscription, "Progress and Poverty," as the body of his idol was borne through the streets of the city with 500,000 citizens watching and the hats coming off as the cortege, C-O-R-T-E-G-E, approached and the whisper going through the great crowds. Uncover, uncover. And his idealism had a target. All his life, Samuel Seabury stalked the tiger. Capital T, tiger. While still in his teens, he took to the street corners and was stoned by Tammany hooligans as he spoke against Tammany candidates as an independent Democrat. As a young lawyer in love with the law, he hated the Tammany-controlled judges who turned New York's courts into instruments of politics rather than justice. Representing, in 100 cases, men unjustly accused by police who took orders from Tammany and unfairly tried before judges who took orders from Tammany, he knew the bitterness of 100 unjust defeats. Just as his idealism grated against Tammany, so did his ambition, which was also strong. His bearing and a rare, stern eloquence made him stand out among the crowd of young reformers. Winning a plurality that for a Citizens Union Party candidate was unprecedented, he was elected as judge over his fellow men at the age of 28. Soon, his fairness and firmness awed even his Tammany colleagues on the city court, into assigning him the most difficult cases. Shout out to Samuel Seabury. His prematurely white hair parted in the center. That is so 1910 of him. His ruddy complexion, his flowing black robes, his pince-nez, and his bearing made him a striking figure on the bench. He needed no gavel to quiet spectators, a biographer wrote. His mien alone served to silence the courtroom. He sat through one long case, according to the New York World, as if his face had been carved out of stone. At 33, he was elected to the state Supreme Court. At 41, to the Court of Appeals. At 43, he was running for governor. Tammany ordered its braves, in voting for the Democratic state ticket, to ignore the man at its head. And so Seabury lost. Okay, now there's an asterisk. Historically, the asterisk and footnotes have been like amazing. So I'm going to read the whole thing. Another element in his defeat, which took place in 1916, was Theodore Roosevelt. TR, whose Progressive Party had joined Reform Democrats in support of Seabury's run for the Court of Appeals, persuaded Seabury to resign from the bench and run for governor in the first place, promising to support him against the GOP nominee Charles S. Whitman. But after Seabury had won the Democratic nomination, Roosevelt, breaking his word, rejoined the GOP and commanded the progressives to back Whitman. So Teddy Roosevelt was like, you should run, like we're all going to vote for you. And then he ran, and then Teddy Roosevelt endorsed the other guy. That feels so catty. It makes me think of like, I don't know, something that I guess that happens everywhere, but I'm thinking about like dumb high school bully type behavior. Seabury paid a visit to Sagamore Hill. Roosevelt started to say something, but Seabury interrupted. Mr. President, you are a... I'm actually going to Google this word and see if it's a racial slur. I think it might be. Let's see. Oh, it's actually not. Okay. You are a blatherskite, and it is a North American slang word for a person who talks at great length without making much sense. Blatherskite. That's a great word, I guess. Okay, Scottish word, blatherskite. Okay, so let's go back to this little biography of the Judge Seabury. I'm really enjoying this little Seabury moment. He hoped the nomination would come his way again in 1918, but that was the year Silent Charlie Murphy saw that it was handed to Al Smith. Embittered, Seabury retired to private life and a series of monumental legal fees, and for more than 10 years kept silent on public issues until, suddenly swooping out of the past to take on Tammany Hall in 1930, he revealed that prosperity had not blunted his zeal for reform and that he was still a man against the machine. There was no telling how far Seabury might have climbed in politics if he had been governor. The terminus he had in mind was the White House. In 1932, on the strength of the publicity he had received from his investigations when he was trying to take down Tammany Hall, he authorized the launching of a try for the Democratic presidential nomination. And the hatred for Tammany that had been ignited by his idealism was fueled by the wreckage the Tiger had made of his ambitions. Okay, so the Tiger is Teddy Roosevelt, I think. Much of his bitterness centered on Al Smith. While most other reformers felt that Smith had risen above the organization, Seabury felt, as he had always felt, that Smith had simply put a respectable smile on the face of a tiger that was as voracious as ever. Okay, wait, so the tiger is probably Tammany Hall. And another tiger, the last time we were talking about tigers was when we were talking about how Al Smith just happened to have like wildcats at the governor's mansion in Albany, but then we never really came back to that. Maybe it was a metaphor, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't, because then I looked it up and Google was like, yeah, there was basically a zoo. Okay, anyway. If anything, Seabury felt, Smith was more inimical, inimical, inimical to the public interest than the depredations of the most corrupt ward leaders, because his popularity provided them with protective coloration. And of course, it was Smith who, by winning 5 times in a row the Democratic gubernatorial nomination, had ensured that Seabury would not be able to follow the gubernatorial road back to the public eye. He had a real conviction about Smith, Moses told an interviewer. It amounted to an actual hatred. He felt that Smith had prevented him from being governor, and if he had been governor, he would have been president. Seabury hated the governor, really hated him. By 1933, wrote a Seabury biography, his anti-Tammany stand was not merely a cause, it was a mania. The narrowness of his perspective made him feel that the most significant fact about Moses was that he was Smith's protege. If Moses became mayor, Seabury thought, the ex-governor would have an opportunity to move Tammany quietly back into control of City Hall. Reform's great opportunity to cleanse the city, the opportunity he had given it, would be lost. Oh, hello. We're on page 352, chapter 19, like 5 pages into chapter 19. We're talking about Judge Samuel Seabury, who led the Seabury investigation, taking down Tammany's corruption stuff, and who, it turns out, hates Al Smith, kind of just because he's really stubborn, but also because Teddy Roosevelt screwed him out of winning the governorship, and so then he ended up losing. And then this next governor election, he lost to Al Smith, and he hates Tammany, and he also hates Al Smith because he really wanted to be president. It starts out by being like, oh yeah, Samuel Seabury, he was so noble, but then as you read more, you're just like, oh wait, he just really wanted to be president. I don't really know if that's noble or just, I don't know, if you just kind of have a bizarre dream and inflated ego, which you kind of have to have if you're going to run for president. I'm probably going to read like one more paragraph. When Joseph Price, following the Fusion Conference Committee meeting, told Seabury its members were for Moses, Seabury refused to approve the choice, and he strongly hinted he would reserve all personal liberty of action, was the way he put it, that if the committee nominated Moses, he would enter his own candidate in the race. Recalling his own feelings, Moses said later, nobody could be elected without Seabury. With Seabury on his side, anyone running on a Fusion ticket could have won that year. Without him, no, it would have been absolutely impossible to win. Moses issued a statement saying, I am not a candidate for the Fusion nomination for mayor and should not accept the nomination if it were offered to me. All right, so Moses is not running for governor or for mayor. That was a very brief flirtation with the mayorship. Is that a word? The Fusion leaders agreed that Seabury's support was crucial, and even if they hadn't felt that way, they would have been reluctant to go against his wishes. They began looking for other candidates. Price drafted an angry statement of resignation from the committee. The best equipped and most able man considered for the Fusion nomination, a man fearless and independent, was objected to by Judge Seabury upon the narrow-minded reason that he is a close friend of Alfred E. Smith, the most popular man in New York City, the statement said. Okay, so they hate Seabury. The Fusion Conference itself was practically unanimous for Mr. Moses, but Price was persuaded to withdraw his resignation, to leave unpublished his statement, and to join with the rest of the committee in search for another candidate. Mayordom, thank you. 5 reformers were to be offered the nomination during the hectic weeks that followed. But these were men to whom politics was something more than an avenue for the realization of personal ambitions. 2 of the 5 judges said that they were happy being judges. A third, a business executive, preferred a career in private life to one in the public. And if they did have political ambitions, they subordinated them to principle. Raymond Ingersoll, 58 years old, a wealthy, respected social worker who had served as a part commissioner in the Mitchell administration and as campaign manager in Smith's 1924 gubernatorial campaign, wanted to be mayor, but was afraid his health would not allow him to do the job properly, and so he declined the nomination. Then Seabury and Maurice P. Davidson, chairman of the City Fusion Party, taking a room in the Hotel Commodore to avoid reporters, offered the nomination to Nathan Strauss. We have not heard of this guy really before. Wrote Davidson, I remember how he came into the room, slim, well-groomed, and how he removed his gloves, laid down his hat and cane, and how delighted he was with the offer, and how he said, nothing has occurred in my lifetime or would ever occur which would bring me greater happiness than the opportunity to serve as mayor of the city of New York. But I ask 48 hours to consider. We met again several days later, says Davidson, who is chairman of this new City Fusion Party. We met again several days later, and he said that he had discussed the matter with some of his advisors and had decided to decline. Okay. The ill-fated star of Adolf Hitler was rising. Jews were accused by Hitler of endeavoring to encompass the control and government of the whole world. Ridiculous and absurd as those charges were, Nathan Strauss refused to accept a nomination for mayor at a time when Herbert Lehman was governor because it might give credence in some quarters to Mr. Hitler's charges. He felt that in the interest of the welfare of his own people of the Jewish faith, and in order not to handicap the success of the reform movement in New York, it was up to him to subordinate any and all personal ambition in the interests of the public good, and he too, therefore, declined. Okay, I'm gonna stop. Oh, actually, I saw something that was really exciting in the next paragraph, so I'm gonna read one more paragraph. There was a politician who wanted the nomination, wanted it desperately. Fiorello H. LaGuardia was standing in the wings. Not standing, but moving around very, very rapidly, Davidson wrote. He would send for me every once in a while and say, how are you getting on? He would say, well, who's your latest mayor? And I would tell him. He would jump around and shake his fist and he'd say, well, there's only one man going to be the candidate and I'm the man. I'm going to run. I want to be mayor. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I'm excited about the LaGuardia stuff because that feels more present day. Okay, I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. Yeah, I know, it's crazy that the Nazis were having. Yeah, this is the age of the Goo-Goos. I hope you're enjoying it. I was quite disappointed actually in the second paragraph when they were like, yeah, Goo-Goos is just what they called the people that were a part of the good government reform movement. But hey, it's okay. I'll take the Goo-Goos I can get. Goodbye.